Zinc Comics presents, live from Darshan Studios, Exposition with Brian Payne. Howdy, everybody. Heroes and heroines out there in cyberspace. This week I really have no one subject to talk about. Got a few things on my mind. I haven't been reading many comics lately, but I have been reading a stack of Comics Journal magazines that I picked up on eBay. And after each one, I said, okay, now I'm going to take a break. But I saw that the next two, one had an interview with Kim Deitch, and the next one had an interview with the Hernandez brothers. So I was like, I think I'll read these two. So I read the one with Kim Deitch, and for those unfamiliar, Kim Deitch is an underground cartoonist. He goes back to the 60s, and he wasn't part of Zap, but he was once the editor of what am I thinking? I'm drawing a blank here. But he drew a lot of underground comics for the East Village Other and stuff like that. I think he appeared in Arcade magazine as well. But his Boulevard of Broken Dreams was named one of Time's 100 best graphic novels ever written. So I really love that Boulevard of Broken Dreams book. Kim Deitch and Bill Griffith are probably my favorite cartoonists from that underground era. And both are doing the best work of their careers right now, currently. So, but he was the son of animator Gene Deitch, who did a lot of animation. I believe he did Tom and Jerry for a while in the later period, and I know he's done a lot of stuff. And he also drew some jazz comic strips for a jazz magazine, I know. And then his brother Simon also helps him occasionally, and sometimes does his own stuff. So the cartooning is strong in that family. But if you've never checked out his work, I strongly suggest it. Boulevard of Broken Dreams, Waldo's World, and The Search for Smiling Ed are three that I highly recommend. Now, I'm just getting into the Hernandez brothers interview, but the Hernandez brothers, sometimes known as Los Bros Hernandez, are Mario, Gilbert, and Jaime, I should say. And the cartoonist responsible for the comic book Love and Rockets, which is a perennial classic and one of the first second wave of alternative black and white magazines, and one of the first Fantagraphics publications, I believe. So it's all Love and Rockets is good stuff. I think they started out in a magazine format, then they stopped and did some other stuff, and then came back with a comic book format Love and Rockets series. And then they stopped that and started doing it like an annual collection graphic novel type thing, with a perfect binding and more page count. And then they stopped that recently and went back to the original magazine format. So there's like, I believe 4 volumes of Love and Rockets, and any issue from any of them is good stuff. I also liked Jaime also did a solo comic called Penny Century that I really liked. And at the same time, Gilbert was doing a solo comic called Luba. So all that's good stuff. Mario helped them get started. I believe he's the oldest of the brothers, and I don't think he does a lot of comics on his own. So here and there he does it occasionally, and a lot of his stuff was in conjunction with his brother Gilbert, and I think Gilbert did most of the drawing and Mario did the scripts. But again, Love and Rockets is another one of those comics that if you haven't checked out, you really should. And if you haven't, why not? Where have you been? Okay. Also, I've said many times that I'm not a huge fan of, I'm more of a fan, I should say, of comic strips rather than comic books. I think comic strips are the more pure expression of comics. And I always would have loved to have done a newspaper strip. I've drawn, I began drawing a strip, and almost every project I go to starts out with the idea that it's going to be a newspaper strip. But unfortunately, that is not what always happens. The best laid plans don't always get you laid, as they say. So, but I do love comic strips. And here, where I'm living in Homer, Alaska, I don't get a daily paper, and the weekly paper doesn't have a comic section per se. That so I'm missing out on reading the daily strips and the Sunday funnies specifically. Um, I think the Peninsula Clarion, which is an area paper for the whole Kenai Peninsula. I think they have a Sunday Funnies section. I'm not sure. I've never bought the paper, but perhaps I should. But anyway, I do read some of these strips online at, I believe it's called Go Comics, and the other one is Comic Strip Kingdom or Comics Kingdom, something like that. They're both websites, and they post a lot of the newspaper strips online, and you can generally read a single strip at a time, maybe even a whole week's worth. Some of them are going to a subscription model, so I don't know how long this will keep going, but and Stephen Pastis. I know I'm mangling his last name. I do this quite often, but he's the creator of the syndicated comic strip Pearls Before Swine. And he once said, "We need more cartoonists to truly retire when they retire and not run repeats." I have to agree. I know a lot of cartoonists do this. I think Peanuts is still running old Charles Schultz strips, but it's hard to make way for new cartoonists when these perennial strips stay in the paper forever. But if these perennial newspaper adventure and soap opera continuity comic strips are going to continue forever, it's important that they have top-notch talent creating them. And recently, a bunch of familiar names from comic books took on the art duties on many of these strips, I've noticed. Rex Morgan, MD, for instance, is drawn by Terry Beatty and written by Terry Beatty now. And he is known. He started out with Mystery, which was written with Max Allen Collins, and Wild Dog, which is also written by Collins. Both of these are comic books that I liked a lot. Mystery was published by Aardvark Vanheim at one time, Dave Sims Publishing Company. I believe they went with Danny in the divorce settlement. She got all the comics that weren't Cerebus, and she started her own comic book company, Renegade. I think they originally might have started off in at Eclipse and were serialized for a time in Eclipse magazine. But both those strips I like a lot. Wild Dog I mentioned earlier. I like because it's based in the Quad Cities, which is uh, two of the cities are in Iowa, and two of the cities are across the Mississippi River in Illinois. Let's see, Davenport. Boy, Moline, East Moline, and there's one other that I'm drawing a blank on. I should know this because I'm from Iowa, but I always liked the fact that they gave Iowa our own superhero or action hero, whatever. He doesn't really have superpowers. Um, but he's writing and drawing Rex Morgan nowadays, and he's a Facebook friend. And so I get a lot of updates and inside info because of that. And he always posts the latest Rex Morgan, and I enjoy seeing that. He also posts a lot of vintage Rex Morgan MD strips, those that came before. So it's nice to see how it used to be and look, and what Terry's doing with it nowadays. I think he's doing a great job. And a lot of people don't like these soap opera strips, but to me, when I was reading the Sunday Funnies, I always liked more the story strips than, I read the funny strips, but there was something about the artwork of those classic adventure and soap opera strips that I just attracted me and appealed to my artistic sensibilities. There's a bunch of other artists who are doing similar work too. Mary Worth is written by Karen Moy and drawn by June Brigman. June Brigman used to draw Power Pack, which was a Marvel comic. And I always liked her style. She has this real clean look, which again appeals to my artistic sensibility. And and then there's Judge Parker, which is by Woody Wilson and Mike Manley. Mike Manley used to draw Darkhawk for Marvel as well. So all these people are coming from comic books and now drawing comic strips. Manley also draws the Phantom Dailies nowadays. And Terry Beatty used to draw the Sunday strips, but the Sunday strips are now drawn by Jeff Weigel and written by DePaul. Jeff Weigel or Weigel is he used to draw the Sphinx for Big Bang Comics. That's where I know him from, but I believe he did work for the Big Two as well. But he's also a Facebook friend, so I get to see the Sunday Phantoms and sometimes the pencils and the process towards the Sunday strip as well. Currently, Prince Valiant is drawn by Mark Schultz and Tom Yeats, And Tom Yeats used to draw Swamp Thing, the saga of Swamp Thing, I should say, before Steve Bissette took over. And he also drew Time Spirits, which I believe came out from Epic Comics. And Mark Schultz, I think, is a cartoonist in his own right and used to do Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, I'm thinking, although Xeno, its Tales it had another name before Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. I think it became a cartoon, animated cartoon, and that's when the name was changed. But so Prince Valiant is looking better than it has in a long time, I think. I mean, and Tom Yeats was born to draw this strip, I think. So the sad thing is, Prince Valiant used to be like an entire tabloid sheet, the entire front page, and now it's been reduced like all comic strips. So it's not quite what it once was, but in splendor, but the artwork is still top notch, I think. And Dick Tracy is being written by Mike Curtis, or I'm not sure who's doing what, but Joe Stanton and Mike Curtis are the credits. And Joe Stanton, I know he used to do E-Man it was published by First when I knew it, but it's gone to many publishers, I know. And he did a memorable stint on Green Lantern and the Green Lantern Corps as well. So Dick Tracy's in good hands as well. And then there's Mark Trail by James Allen. I don't think he has a comic strip history. Comic book history. I could be wrong, but he's doing good stuff on Mark Trail. And Gil Thorpe. These two strips are considered almost a joke and a running gag by a lot of cartoonists, but I like them both too. Gil Thorpe is currently being written by Neil Rubin and drawn by Rod Wingham. And Rod Wingham used to do the G.I. Joe comic, draw the G.I. Joe comic for Marvel. And that's another good strip. So when you're looking through your Sunday paper or your daily comic section, look for these strips and these names, because I think they're doing good work, and I think they've raised the bar on the comics page, and I think that's a good thing for comics in general, and especially newspaper strips. Again, I'd like to see some of these strips go the way of the dodo and have new strips come take their place. But we all know that Americans like the familiar, and it's hard to get new strips off the ground nowadays. And we're just lucky that there's still newspaper comics, I think. A lot of newspapers have dropped the comic section altogether, and that's sad, because that's where it all began, and I'd hate to see it end. But those were some good strips, and I hope you check them out. Okay, finally, let's see. I guess I'll talk about Comicsgate. I hate going into this, but I got 10 minutes to vamp, and let's see what happens. Rose McDermott and Peter K. Hameti wrote populist movements rely on inflammatory rhetoric to create a tribal us versus them condition. This type of environment instigates neural mechanisms from the evolutionary desire to be part of the group. For those lucky enough not to know anything about Comicsgate yet, it's allegedly a little campaign. It's allegedly a campaign opposed to what this conservative little club perceived to be forced diversity, whatever that is, and so-called progressive political propaganda in mainstream comic books. Albeit, in my opinion, it's something other than that entirely. Regardless, as the late Toni Morrison once said, all good art is political. There is none that isn't. And the ones that try hard not to be political are political by saying, we love the status quo. We've just dirtied the word politics, made it sound like it's unpatriotic or something. And to quote Howard Chaykin, it should come as no surprise to anyone but a complete idiot that I completely reject everything that the so-called Comicsgate cabal represent and stands for. As do I. However, I've still been keeping an eye upon the ongoing debate in Comicsgate on Twitter, more for my own amusement than anything else. Excuse me. Recently, there has been a lot of infighting among the original old guard between both creator and consumer, and indeed the creators themselves as well. Many seemingly have an almost cult-like devotion and are desperately committed to the cause, insisting that Comicsgate is comics' last best hope and a golden opportunity for these blackballed conservative creators to rake in the big bucks. Like Trump supporters, they also claim any opposition to their movement is based on jealousy and Hulk green envy. Yet, in my opinion, the possibility that they are merely enthralled by a cult of YouTube personalities and or demagogues is not a vain imagining. I doubt very much that those who have left the safety of their gated community did so because they didn't believe the hype, but rather because they were afraid and tired of being punished for saying what they thought. This luxury is seemingly reserved for a select few and only those in the highest rungs of the hierarchy. The other day, I actually replied to a single tweet on the subject, only to quickly delete it before the inevitable dog pile became too much. I've seen others become a victim to these overzealous Comicsgate hit squads and refuse to play that, and I refuse to play that game myself. Independent comics are certainly nothing new, but what I see going on here, frat boy attempts at humor and greedhead exploitation, is not only heartbreakingly sad, but destructive to the comics community, and generally dangerous to the industry itself as well. Comicsgate is not unique. In fact, it is all too familiar. Enough said. Got a little time to kill here, so I'm going to leaf through this Comics Journal, the magazine of news and criticism, and see what strikes my fancy. This is issue 126, and it was published, let's see here, January 1989. One thing I'm currently reading and enjoying is an article written by, let's see here, don't want to get it wrong. It's written by Frank Stack, who used to be, he drew for American Splendor, Howard P. Picar, Harvey Picar's book, American Splendor. And he used to do underground comics under the pseudonym Fulbert Sturgeon, with the New Adventures of Jesus and other tales. But a lot of people know him from, he was as Frank Stack and a frequent collaborator of Harvey Picar in American Splendor. But he's doing a story about, what's the cartoonist's name here? Jose Munoz, who drew, he's most famous for Sinner probably here in America, but he's an Argentine exile cartoonist, I believe. And he also did a comic called Joe's Bar. But he's talking about, he basically goes into deep detail about Joe's Bar and talks about Jose's work. And Fantagraphics also championed Jose Menez's work, and I believe they've published a few collections, and I believe he also appeared in Raw and perhaps Fantagraphics Prime Cuts as well. But Sinner is really a great comic. There's several collections. Check it out if you get a chance. He's also famous because Keith Giffen started, some say plagiarized, some say appropriated, some say just out and out stole or traced actual panels from Munoz's comics. He originally, this began, I believe, in Legion of Superheroes, towards the end of his tenure on that book. And you saw it in his style for quite a while. This is pre-Trencher style, post the style everyone loved in Legion of Superheroes. And this was the era whenever everyone was saying, what the heck's gotten wrong in Kenneth or Keith Giffen's head, I should say. I'm really doing great. I'm calling Keith Giffen Kenneth, and I'm calling Harvey Picar Howard. But needless to say, it's Harvey Picar and Keith Giffen. And I definitely see what they're talking about, but I would like to, I don't know that it was straight appropriation, but I think it was dang close to theft. But I really liked that style when Keith Giffen was doing it. And to be honest, I wasn't aware of Munoz's work at that time. So in a way, this introduced me to his work, not the other way around. So although it might not have been the smartest thing Keith Giffen ever did, it was still a pretty good, worked out okay in the end, because now I know about Munoz and Sinner and that work. So it made it at least a subject of discussion among comic fans. So I was able to get hip. I was really proud of the show we did last week. It was a poetry reading. If you haven't checked it out, definitely do so. My wife and I did an old-fashioned poetry slam on here. And anyway, that makes it a wrap for this week. Until next time, think Zinc.